If you are fascinated by the line between genius and madness, or just curious about how mental health intersects with the justice system and medicine and modern society, if so, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I will be reviewing The Best Minds by Jonathan Rosen. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're taking a look at yet another one of the finalists for the Pulitzer Prize in autobiographies slash memoirs. We will be covering The Best Minds, and to go ahead and get much of the premise of this book out of the way, let me read the subtitle. So it's called The Best Minds, A Story of Friendship, Madness, and the Tragedy of Good Intentions. Because at the heart of this book is an individual who, although is very intelligent, at times much of the public is very enamored with him because of just how incredibly intelligent he is, despite the fact that he suffers severely from schizophrenia. And I will tell you now that there's a very, very tragic scene at the end of the book that is a big part of why this individual got a whole lot of attention. In this book, since it is under the autobiography slash memoir section, it is also in part telling the story of the author himself, Jonathan Rosen. And it also tells the story of his childhood friend, Michael Laudor. Laudor is the one that you'll eventually see why he gets so much public attention. He himself was known as a prodigy with just like seemingly limitless potential. He was known to be incredibly intelligent, but he is going to eventually develop schizophrenia. And we're going to see how they both are incredibly successful at school. They come from very intellectual households. They are both interested in pursuing higher education. However, their paths are going to eventually diverge when it comes to college, which is one of the challenges of this book that I'll discuss when I get to the end. But you can see as Rosen goes on to pursue writing, and his friend Michael, who is going to initially be quite successful in college, however, in his 20s, as he is developing the schizophrenia, he is also going to find it very difficult to pursue his career, to go into law, something that he studies. He goes to, I believe, Yale Law School in it. And so this is trying to tell their two stories, although because there's a fair amount of time in which they're separated, you can see why much more of what he starts to talk about when it comes to Laudor is actually the national attention that he is getting. He's getting a fair amount of attention because although he has schizophrenia, he is writing about it, and he actually becomes a bit of a public figure trying to advocate for getting help for schizophrenia, which is of course touching on all sorts of issues in society and when it comes to mental health and funding for it, but also how people are treated for it. He himself would like to have a stable career, but it is proving increasingly difficult. There are going to be times when he goes back to teaching and he's going to be celebrated for a time, but he is also frequently going to have problems because of his schizophrenia and his inability to maintain a job. And then I will tell you now that the very sudden and the very challenging moment comes at the end when he actually kills his fiancée, who was pregnant at the time. And that initially sets off just this fury of curiosity about how he could do this, how just how bad was this psychotic episode. And it is going to continue to address all of the nationwide concerns of how are we dealing with people that have any kind of instability or psychotic episodes. How does this contribute to stuff like homelessness? How does this contribute to people's inability to own a home, to raise a family, to hold down a steady job? All of that is going to be highlighted by this very violent moment. And in many ways, it actually undercuts it, unfortunately, because he had been such a big advocate that had been getting a lot of attention. The fact that he had such a terrible psychotic episode that leads to the death of not only his fiancée, but also an unborn child. All that's really going to complicate this story. Yeah, yeah. All that's just really going to complicate this story and make it a challenge when looking back at his life of trying to figure out, well, how much good did he do for society by being a proponent for better awareness and advocating for more attention to mental health? But then how do you also address the fact that he clearly had been a threat to people? He'd been a threat to his girlfriend. That's going to be the real trouble of this and the balance act that Rosen's trying to address. I will say there's two big issues. Well, one, it's kind of long, and also not to downplay Rosen. He himself also has an interesting life, but it is much more about him because he's not actually around Michael for probably the last 2/3 of the book. And so it's about him and his life and his expectations, and specifically at times how he feels like he's in the shadow of Michael, and how the rest of his community is viewing Michael. And so there's also kind of this bent of a little bit of resentment, or at least that's kind of how it came off to me. And I understand that, I mean, that's valuable. That is his human experience, but I think it does also kind of challenge the importance of understanding the life of Michael. The other thing is that it then kind of ends relatively abruptly after this really tragic event. I mean, it spends sometimes detailing what happened and a little bit of the consequences. You do find out that Michael is going to, plead insanity, which he's going to be found not guilty on grounds of insanity, and he to this day is in some kind of psychiatric ward somewhere. But the problem with that is that they don't ever really give you a whole lot of detail about what all was determined, or what all was found out or determined with his episode. And it just makes it a little bit of a challenge to fully appreciate what this story could be telling us about the complexities of trying to help people with mental health issues, but also facing the reality of sometimes some people can be dangerous, and having some kind of system in place that can help us. It doesn't really address that, and it falls a little short. And on top of that, I will say something I didn't realize is that before A Beautiful Mind was made, many of the people involved in that actually were originally in talks with Michael, trying to get his life story told. And so you can see these two parallel stories of people with mental health issues that are being addressed. And one, of course, the story of Mr. Nash, Professor Nash, turns into this major, incredibly well-known movie. And he himself goes on to have a relatively stable life, although he unfortunately dies early from a car crash, as I recall. But this attention did not seem to completely derail his life. And then you have this parallel example of Michael, who unfortunately, for whether the attention helped or not, I'm not sure, but regardless, he is going to have a rather tragic event in his life that is going to completely reshape the trajectory of everything. So who would I say this is for? Well, it's going to take some endurance, because one, it's a little long, I felt like, and like I said, it's a great deal of just really challenging topics that you're going to have to deal with, not just a brief discussion of schizophrenia and mental health illness, but a protracted discussion of it. And of course, at the end, with that very disturbing scene, that's a big part of the book, or at least it's a big part of, I think, what will stick with people. So I think that those are certainly things that you have to keep in mind if you're going to read this book. I have not read any of the other books in the autobiography and memoir section yet, so I don't know how I feel like it stacks up. By and large, I thought much of it was well written. Rosen is clearly a good author. I just think that maybe this book isn't for everyone for a variety of reasons. So who do I not think this is for? Well, but of course, I'd love to know what you guys think about this book, if you've read it, or if my review has led you away from it. Please let me know your thoughts on that as well. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.